Hey, I'm a psychiatrist, and today I'm breaking down what high functioning depression actually is, why it's so hard to recognize, and most importantly, why it still deserves treatment even if you're managing. Now, high functioning depression is a super tricky mental health concept because from the outside, everything looks okay. These folks are showing up to work, they're meeting deadlines, they're maintaining relationships, or at least all of these things appear to be happening on the surface. But internally, they're running on empty. And for a lot of folks, they've been running empty for so long that they've forgotten what it feels like to have a half or even full tank. Now, as a psychiatrist, I've always thought that the word high functioning misdirects a little bit here because this happens to be one of the most misunderstood presentations of depression, and people can end up being sick for a very long time because of that. Now, as we will learn in a little bit, high functioning and thriving are two extremely different things. Now, if you're new here, I am Dr. Joseph, also known as Dr. J, and I am a medical doctor specializing in psychiatry, and my major goal here is to make mental health make sense for you. So, welcome. So when I think of high functioning depression in my clinics, I'm usually looking at one of a few things. It could be persistent depressive disorder, which basically means depression that lasts for at least 2 years but might not be as severe as a major depression. It could also be chronic, low-grade major depression, or it could be someone with recurrent depressive episodes who's just developed really effective compensation strategies over time. Now, here's what this looks like. I want you to think about someone who wakes up every morning feeling heavy. They are not actively suicidal and they are able to get out of bed, but there's this constant weight on their chest, this background noise of, what's the point of all this? They push through it because they have to, they go to work, they smile when they're supposed to, they even respond to texts, even though it feels like moving through quicksand. And the specific clinical features I'm looking for in a patient like this are low mood for most of the time, not necessarily crying or obvious sadness, but more like an emotional flatness or joylessness. Looking for loss of interest in things that used to matter, so things like hobbies start to feel like chores, and social events feel draining even if they're supposed to be theoretically fun. I'm also looking for low energy despite adequate sleep, or difficulty concentrating. So you see a lot of people describe feeling foggy or like their brain is running at 50%. I'm also looking for changes in appetite or sleep patterns that aren't dramatic but are persistent over a long period of time. But here's the biggest key clinical distinction. These symptoms are usually chronic. We're not talking about having a bad week or having a tough month. I'm talking years and years for some people. For persistent depressive disorder, we specifically need symptoms most days of the week for at least 2 years. But most people I have seen have been dealing with this for way longer than that. They'll say things like, I think I felt this way since college, or I can't remember the last time I genuinely felt excited about something. The difference between this and major depression is that in major depression, you typically see more severe symptoms that significantly impair functioning. So people can't go to work, they're sleeping 14 hours a day or not at all, or they're having active suicidal thoughts. Now, with high functioning depression, the symptoms are milder, but they're persistent. And that chronicity is really important because it fundamentally shapes how people see themselves and their future. You see, when depression becomes your baseline, you start to think, this is just how I am. And that makes it so much harder to recognize that a solution is possible. Okay, our second point. Let's talk about why high functioning depression is so difficult to spot, both for the person experiencing it and for people around them. And the biggest reason is compensation mechanisms. You see, people with high functioning depression develop really sophisticated strategies to hide what they're going through. And they do this so effectively that sometimes even they don't realize how much energy they're spending just to appear normal. Think about this. someone wakes up with that heavy feeling in the chest we talked about. Getting out of bed feels massive, but they have a meeting at 9 a.m. so they push through. They shower, they make coffee, they put on clothes that say, I have my life together. And by the time they are on the video call, you would never know that they spent a full 30 minutes staring at the ceiling trying to find the motivation to start their day. This is what I call high functioning practice. It's not that these folks aren't depressed, it's that they've gotten really good at performing a not depressed look. And that performance is truly exhausting. Another reason this is hard to recognize are external marks of success. You see, when someone has a good job, they maintain their relationships, they exercise regularly, and they eat relatively well, society tells us that means they're doing fine. People might even say, look at everything you've accomplished. But accomplishment and well-being are not the same thing. You see, I've had patients literally tell me, I got promoted at work and all I could think of was, great, now I have to keep pretending to care about this even more. You see, the external validation doesn't touch the internal emptiness. And that disconnect is really confusing because we've been taught that if we just achieve more and more, we'll feel better. But there's also the comparison trap, right? Because people with high functioning depression often minimize their own suffering because they compare themselves to people who are really depressed. They say things like, I can still go to work, or, it's not that bad, or other people must have it worse than me, or at least I'm not suicidal. Now, this is the classic, not sick enough narrative that keeps people from seeking help. And as a doctor, here's what's particularly challenging from a diagnostic standpoint. And that is, when these folks do come in for an evaluation, they might even downplay their symptoms. They'll say things like, I'm doing okay, or it's not that bad, because they genuinely believe that. They've been functioning at this level for so long, they don't have a good comparison point for what non-depressed feels like. And as a psychiatrist, I have to dig deeper. I ask questions like, when's the last time you felt genuinely excited about something? Or how often do you feel like you're going through the motions? Or if nothing was stopping you, what would you want to be different about your life? Now, the answers to those questions usually reveal way more than a common "do you feel sad?" Now, by the way, if you're finding this video helpful, definitely subscribe now so you don't miss out on future videos like this. You will also be helping spread mental health awareness by making this channel visible to others, so thank you in advance. Our third point relates to the cost of maintaining high functioning while depressed. So I want you to imagine you're running your laptop with, 50 applications and websites all open in the background. Everything still technically works, but everything is also much slower and requires so much energy. You can still get things done, but that effort is just grinding and grinding. That's what high functioning depression feels like. The energy required to appear normal is huge. So think about someone who wakes up feeling that emotional heaviness. To get to work, they have to override their brain telling them, what's the point? What's the point? What's the point? They have to fake that they're excited for a project they don't care about. They have to engage in small talk when they'd rather be invisible. They have to mask all of this exhaustion and that nagging feeling that nothing matters. Now, unfortunately, that masking isn't just tiring, it's depleting in a way that's hard to recover from. Because when you get home, you can't just turn off the depression, it's still there. But now you're also too exhausted to do anything about it. And I see this pattern constantly in psychiatry practice. Someone spends all day performing competence at work, and by the time they get home, they have nothing left. They can't cook a real meal, they can't call friends, they can't engage with hobbies, just collapse on their couch and scroll through their phone for 3 hours because that's the only thing that requires zero effort. This creates a vicious cycle because the things that might actually help, like exercise and social connection and engaging in activities, they all feel impossible because they've used up all their energy just maintaining baseline function. So the depression continues and the exhaustion gets worse. There's also an emotional cost here because many people with high functioning depression describe feeling numb. Not actively sad, just flat, like they're watching their life through glass. And and they go through the motions of relationships but don't feel connected. They achieve things but don't feel proud. It's like the emotional color has been drained from their life and everything is just super gray. And this emotional flatness is pretty tough because people sometimes don't recognize it as a symptom. They think it's just, I'm just becoming more realistic, or I'm just maturing and realizing that life is not that exciting. But that's not maturity, it's depression. To even add more to that, here's something I see all the time in my practice. People with high functioning depression often have this belief that they don't deserve help because they're managing. So they tell themselves that, I should be grateful. Other people need more therapy than I do. But the truth is, suffering is suffering, and managing is not the same as thriving. Okay, for our fourth point, let's talk about the misconceptions that keep people from getting help. Because there's some really harmful narratives around high functioning depression. Well, the first misconception today is, if you can still work, you don't really have depression. Well, this is false, right? Because depression exists on a spectrum, and the fact that you've developed coping mechanisms that allow you to maintain employment doesn't negate the internal experience of depression. In fact, forcing yourself to function despite depression can make the symptoms worse over time. Okay, second misconception, you just need to try harder. Now, this one is particularly harmful because it frames depression as a moral failing rather than a medical condition. And I've had patients tell me, I know I should be happy, I have a good life, I just need to be more positive. But the truth is, depression doesn't care about your circumstances. It's not about lacking gratitude or not trying hard enough. It's about actual brain architecture and psychological patterns that may require treatment. Now, when people tell themselves that they just need to try harder, what they're actually doing is adding guilt and shame on top of the depression, which makes everything so much worse. Okay, our third misconception is medication is for people who are really depressed. So here's the thing. If symptoms are persistent and impairing quality of life, medication can be an appropriate intervention, regardless of whether someone can technically function. The goal of treatment isn't to prevent hospitalization. It can also be to help people actually enjoy their lives. Now, I have seen people transform with appropriate treatment, and someone who's been functioning at 50% for years and years realizes, wait, so this is what other people feel like all the time. So tasks that used to just require enormous willpower become manageable, and emotional experience that used to just feel super gray become rich and vibrant again. Okay, our fourth misconception. Therapy is only for people in crisis. Now, therapy isn't just for crisis intervention. It's also for addressing chronic patterns that keep you stuck. With high-functioning depression, therapy can help identify the compensation mechanisms that are exhausting you, and maybe even challenge the beliefs that keep you from seeking help, and develop strategies that actually address the depression rather than just masking it. In my opinion though, the biggest misconception are the various versions of my depression isn't bad because I'm still functioning. So, let me be super clear about this. The fact that you're functioning despite depression doesn't make depression any less real. If anything, it shows how much strength you're using just to survive. But you shouldn't have to spend all that strength just to appear okay. You and everyone else deserve to feel okay. Now, one major good news is that high-functioning depression appears to respond really well to treatment. This includes psychotherapy, medication, and lifestyle changes. There are some thoughts that this is because you are not starting from absolute crisis, and you may have more physical and mental resources to engage with therapy and make the appropriate lifestyle changes that will ultimately support your recovery. Because the goal is to quit the high-functioning hamster wheel and actually begin to thrive. So through these 5 points, here's what I really want you to hear. And that is the fact that if you've been struggling for a long time but telling yourself that you don't need help because you're managing, that's the depression talking, likely not you. Functioning is not the same as flourishing, and you don't have to wait until you can't function anymore to deserve treatment. The fact that you're watching this and recognizing yourself in this description, that is very important information. High functioning depression is still depression. It still deserves validation. It deserves treatment. and recovery is very, very possible. Now, the most important thing you can do is reach out to a licensed mental provider who can do a proper evaluation and discuss treatment options with you. You don't have to keep running on empty. Now, if you found value in this video, I want you to hit that subscribe button right now so you don't miss future videos like this. Also, feel free to drop a comment about one surprising thing you learned about high-functioning depression today. I read and respond to every single comment, so I look forward to hearing your thoughts. In the meantime, I'm Dr. Joseph, and I will see you on the next video.